grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battle-Born Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Out in Front with Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battle-Born Progress. So excited to have you all joining us tonight to talk about a very important thing that President Biden was able to do last week. Some people were able to get some of their student loan debts excused last week, and we are so excited about that. And we hope he goes further, and we hope that Congress and others do more, because student loan debt is not necessary in this country. Education should be free, but what do I know? So we have 3 amazing people here tonight to join us to talk about this important historic moment and what this means for them and their student loan debt, and what this means for the country and where we're going on this conversation. You know, it's so funny to think about it, because just a few years ago, when we were talking about how student loan debt needed to go away, I remember conservatives just being outraged by, I mean, they're still salty about it, but whatever. I drink their tears for power. But what is so important about this is that we have changed the conversation in this country over just a few short years. And that shows what good grassroots organizing and action can do to change the narrative in this country and change how we see different issues. And I think student loan debt is one of those key issues. I remember working on it back at the Nevada legislature a few years ago, and a lot of people didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But now here we are talking about the president doing this historic, legislation and helping people, real people, not banks and billionaires, but real people with a really important historic moment to get them out of debt quicker and move us forward in this country. So tonight we are joined by some amazing folks. First person and see all the time on our shows and on our work, that's Beverly Schreiber. She's our data manager here at Battle-Born Progress. But she has worked with young people for a very long time. She worked at NextGen and various other places. And so she knows a lot about this from the youth perspective as well. But she also has student loan debt. So she's going to talk to us about that in a few minutes. We have Max Leonard. He is a senior field organizer with For Our Future and a recent graduate of UNLV. Congratulations. That's where I graduated as well. And his pronouns are he and they. And he is going to be talking about his student loan debt as well and what this means for him. In addition to that, we have Catherine Speller, return guest to the show. Welcome back, Catherine. She is the sex and health editor at She Knows, and she is a Pell Grant recipient. So obviously this is going to have a huge impact on her as well. So Bev, I want to bring you in first. I want you to talk a little bit about what this means for you personally, what your student loan situation is. Obviously, I know you have them. And what the decision by President Biden last week will mean for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, I'm Beverly. Y'all have seen me around on BBP stuff. I'm the data manager, and I've been with BBP since January, and I love it. But before that, I have done a lot of work with the youth organizing movement. That's actually how I know Max is from our time at NextGen. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to be here on the show. So for me, I do have student loans. I was very lucky in that my undergrad, I did not have to take out loans. Maybe a blessing in disguise that I had a small inheritance money that covered my undergraduate education. And that was obviously helped by the fact that I ended up transferring from a school out of state to UNLV halfway through my college education. So obviously, financial was a consideration when I made that decision. But I do have graduate student loan debt, and it's crazy. In these 6 years, I believe, since I graduated, my debt has gone from $48,000 to $54,000. So please tell me how that makes sense, because I don't know. So for me personally, this decision is huge. Even $10,000 off my debt will bring me lower than like I ever could have been. On top of just the fact that, I have like this massive amount of debt, monthly payments are a huge thing. And I think that's not really talked about as much when we're talking about the student loan issue. Even if you have a well-paying job, my monthly payments before the pandemic were $500 a month. And that's crazy. So for me, I'm really excited about Biden's announcement. I think it's great for everyone who's been affected by this issue. I think there's more that we can do, but I think this is a really good start.
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's a start. It's definitely not the finish line. This is not the end, but to have, a man in his 70s finally turn around and look at the cameras and say, it's time for real people to get a break, not just billionaires and corporations. Again, I think that's a really monumental thing that we've been able to do, especially young people in this country have been able to do in changing the narrative around student loan debt and how, frankly, predatory student loan debt is, because you have young people who are going into debt to get a higher education when, like I said, I think that education is a right, not a privilege, and everybody should have access to education in this country, regardless of what you want to do with it. So, Bev, what is the importance of the student loan debt issue, especially to young voters, but to all voters, because we know people of all ages have student loan debt issues? And do you think this was necessary for Biden to address before the midterm?
Yeah, this obviously affects a huge portion of the population. I think even in the release that President Biden's team sent out last week, they mentioned senior citizens still having student loan debt. That's crazy. Like, you should not be in your retirement years and still having to pay off student loan debt. And I think, especially for younger generations, like we're going to see this more and more. I think the statistic was like 44% of people between the ages of 25 and 40 have student loan debt, massive student loan debt. And so I think that it's very important that this is happening now. I kind of forgot the second half to your question already. I'm so sorry. I was on a train.
Do you think it's necessary for him to address this before the midterms? I mean, there's been a lot of conversation, and I think this is intentional by the right, of, he's not upholding his promises. He's not doing this. He's not doing that. I mean, the president is only one man in 3 branches of government. And, it takes also Congress to do things. It takes the courts to potentially do things or not do things. So, him doing this and doing this the way he did it is really important, because he is working to actually keep the promises he made on the campaign trail. And again, is it a total fix? Absolutely not. But it's the beginning of that process.
Yeah. And I think I know personally, I wish it would have come sooner. I think a lot of us do feel that way. But at the same time, I think it's so important before the midterms. Like, this is probably one of the number one issues for young voters consistently. And so, like, the best way to get young people to support you is to help them, have a better financial future. So absolutely, I think this was necessary to do in order to get that demographic of people to turn out to vote in November.
Yeah. So before we turn it over to Max and Catherine, I really want to dive in a little bit on what this piece of legislation does, because there's a lot of confusion around it. Like I said, the conservatives are very salty about it because, they don't care about bailing out billionaires or banks or auto companies or whatever the plethora of things we've bailed out in this country. But, bailing out somebody who, potentially makes minimum wage or has gone into debt to get a higher education, God forbid we do that. And I say that as somebody who actually doesn't have student loan debt. I was lucky enough to have the Millennium Scholarship here in Nevada. That between that and my parents, being able to put some money away for me through like savings bonds and things like that from when I was a kid, I was able to pay for my undergrad and go to school at UNLV for free. My husband worked his way through with the Millennium Scholarship. He doesn't have student loan debt either. And because we don't have student loan debt, we were able at 24 to buy a house. We were able to pay off our cars. So we were able to reinvest in the economy in ways that maybe other people who have student loan debt aren't able to do because we have extra income. So it actually is a good thing for the economy when people can pay their debt off faster. So I just wanted to lay all that out to say, what does this bill actually do? And how will it, there's a second piece of it that I don't think enough people are talking about, where it restructures the way that people pay back those loans in a faster way. And I think that's a really big part of this legislation that not enough people are talking about as well. So talk about what this does and doesn't do.
Yeah, exactly. I agree 100%. I think the portion about the income-driven plans that they are restructuring, that is so huge, and like nobody's talking about that. I think that should be one of the main talking points. So I'll start with that, which is that in addition to cutting the interest rate for undergraduate loans, so it's going to cut the amount that borrowers have to pay every month from 10% to 5% of their discretionary income. So that's huge. You're basically going to be saving, I think, like on average over $1,000 a year. It also forgives the loan balances after 10 years of payment instead of after 20 years for borrowers who took less than $12,000. And so I think especially for people who chose to go to community college or trade schools, that's huge. They're going to get their entire student loan debt wiped out, which is amazing. And then I think the really cool thing about the income-driven repayment plans that they're restructuring is as long as a borrower is paying their monthly payments, they will not have to pay their unpaid interest. And like that is huge. I wish that was happening for everybody, to be honest, because again, that's, in my situation, that's where most of my debt is coming from. And that's why it's ballooning, is because of interest. And the fact that we haven't had to pay interest for the last couple of years because of the pause on interest and loan repayments, from the pandemic, it's honestly been huge for our generation. Again, like we have been able to save. I know so many people who have been able to like invest in homes and like start to put money away for retirement. Like those are things that, prior to this, we never really thought about. So it does that, which is really cool. In addition, for Pell Grant recipients, I believe they said 90% of debt cancellation benefits are going to people who earn less than $75,000 a year. So this is really to help low and middle income families who qualify for the Pell Grant, who are making less than $60,000 a year to get the Pell Grant. And I'll let Catherine obviously speak a lot more on that because she's personally experiencing that. But that's, again, a huge, huge piece. On top of that, we know that Black and Brown borrowers are twice as likely to have received Pell Grants, which means they are getting a reduction, which, in theory will help to advance, racial equity in higher education.
Yeah, this is historic. It's amazing. And again, it's just a start. There's so much more work to be done. So Max, I want to bring you in because obviously you have a story to share on this as well. Can you start off by just sharing what has been happening with your student loan debt and how President Biden's plan will be directly impacting you from the stuff that Bev just talked about?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very fortunate. I feel fortunate at least that because I graduated in May, that my entire debt will be gone. So I won't be experiencing what a lot of people are experiencing before this, just suffering. And the amount of money I'll be saving monthly will be humongous too. A lot of my monthly bills and stuff already consume so much of my income that if this debt would have been put on top of it, it would have just increased it so much, too much. So I was very nervous about the $5,000 that I was owing because I wanted to pay it off before I go to my to do higher more education. I want to get my master's. I want to get my PhD. And a lot of that scared me because like most folks who go in higher education, you see those numbers and you're like, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to go near that. And with at least these $5,000 being away from my debt, I am now more motivated to go to higher education because I was going to wait to pay it off before going to more into debt. So this is pushing me right towards going for my master's. Like within a year, I'm going to start going for my master's. So this is really significant for me. And it's awesome that I'm getting everything eradicated. So I'm really excited.
So, in your opinion, like I said, this is not perfect. No piece of legislation ever is. There's always more work to be done. Aside from forgiving all debt, which, again, I agree with 100%, what else do you think Biden's plan could have done to maybe go further? And what steps do you hope we take next?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would have liked to have seen is a plan to reduce tuition period and at least maybe not. I know it's amazing that Biden even got to this point. Like I'm really happy. We're all very happy. But I think a lot of what could have been very beneficial is just getting that tuition changed because that's what I've heard and what I personally would say is that most college students, what we wanted is just the basic of the tuition being just a lot more affordable, then we wouldn't have these problems. And so I think that's like one of the biggest things I think would be beneficial. But yeah, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. No worries. Catherine, I want to bring you in next. You are a Pell Grant recipient yourself. So what was the importance of Biden including relief for Pell Grant recipients in his student loan plan? And what does this mean to you now?
Right. So for me, that just shows fundamentally that he's recognizing that every family and every individual's journey to getting to higher education is different. And in my case, and people like me who received Pell Grants, your era, you're 17 years old and you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next. And more for my generation, there was an increased pressure that going to a four-year university was the only way to succeed and to maybe have access to the kind of life you want to live, which means being near your peers, being a walkable community, all these things. I cannot emphasize how much that was hammered into us. And we weren't necessarily aware of all the different options we could have at 17 to take a breather, really critically consider where we go next. So we were then tasked with footing the bill for these tuition costs, which are, averaging 10 to 20K, depending on the kind of college you're going to versus like the 70s and 80s. It was under 1,000 or under 2,000. So an obscene amount of money. And I, at the time, my dad had been going through some legal issues. My family was on food stamps. And I was a dweeby little kid who liked to carry books around and knew I wanted to keep doing that for the foreseeable. And my only path was to try to see how can I make the numbers work. And my Pell Grants were a huge part of that. And that was a way of knowing that not only am I hopefully not going to be signing up for as much interest and as much debt down the line, but that this money will clear and it will be able to help me keep a roof over my head, keep my meal plan going, keep all of these things going, while I was also considering my family and trying to think, how in 4 years will I be able to be a contributor to my family and my community? And that was kind of where I was at 17 years old. And when I think about all the other 17 and 18-year-olds who have to make those kind of intense financial decisions, like, my heart goes out to them. And so the Biden administration choosing to specifically look at Pell Grant recipients and recognize that the working poor and the working class do have more barriers to entry. And then how can you actually help them? And then recognizing that years down the line, after completing your 4-year degree or after you've studied or dropped out, a lot of people who are in my kind of situation do drop out because the costs add up, or you're burning out from the symptoms of being working poor, which are having to afford rent, having to look at all of the different numbers spinning around your orbit and how you're going to make it work. You're just saddled with this debt. So being able to look at, okay, you're a lower working class person, and now they recognize your burden is intense and that it's generational, and that generational wealth is its own thing that others do have, and it does, their pain was alleviated differently by those factors.
I want to talk about that. You know, I had somebody come on my Facebook page the other day who I went to high school with and went to college with. And, you know, they chose to go out of state. I chose to stay here. We had different choices in our lives. Both of us grew up with immense privilege, whether he thinks he did or not. But we were by no means what I would consider wealthy, but we were far better off than most of our peers, right? We had a leg up in this world. We have privilege, whether he thinks he does or not. And, you know, I would argue that the people who I went to school with did have more income, but they were by no means wealthy. So when I hear that this is a handout for wealthy young people, I get a little salty about that, because I don't believe it is. And I believe that the young people who had to take out loans to be able to go to school are the young people who need the most help, who could potentially, like I said, turn around and become doctors or nurses or teachers or all the things we need in this community. But in addition to that, they could turn around and also now invest in their lives and actually build wealth and build a savings account and be able to feed themselves, you know, the basics in life. And so I don't think it's a handout for wealthy students, but what do you think about that?
Well, this goes to like the larger class solidarity mission that we all have to be on and building in the coming years, and that we have to look critically at. Nobody in America wants to admit when there are working class or working poor. Everyone likes to think of themselves as the temporarily embarrassed billionaire, or everyone is middle class, you know, so we don't necessarily have a full grasp on the sheer amount of wealth that exists in this country. The wealthy don't need student loans. They had, first of all, functional ways of saving, of investing, their parents putting away money, and all these kinds of ways of paying less taxes to fund their educations. Those people aren't benefiting from this, sure, but they didn't need to. The people who have to take out loans are not your enemy. They are not any different, you know, than you have more in common with them. Like I know for a fact, me as somebody who was a Pell Grant recipient and who went to school and I'm a journalist and was on that sweet spot of under 70K for years, salary wise, have way more in common with folks who are working on roofs and who are working on roads than I do with somebody who has a trust fund. That's just a fundamental fact. And when we recognize that there's a vested interest in making sure that we're all squabbling over the same couple $100 billion rather than looking at where the money is going and who is actually maybe receiving handouts via not paying as many taxes, via all those fun little corporate puzzle pieces of not contributing to society. So it's much better if we're all squabbling with each other. And I think that's a vested interest part of like that strategy of making us think like the wealthy are benefiting. No, if somebody has that much student debt and received a Pell Grant and they're getting 20K off, trust me, they're not this is not a rich person getting one off. And also everyone is obsessed with the idea that people are scamming systems. And it's a dirty, dirty lie. And also if somebody's managing to scam it, but then like one scammer among thousands of people who really need help, we really need to weigh the odds of like, is that important? When instead living in a society means wanting all parts to grow and rise together.
Yeah, so I want to dive into this with you a little more, just because I feel like you're on the same page with me on this. This person's argument was they went out of state to go to school. They got the Millennium Scholarship just like I did. They could have made the choice to go to my beloved UNLV or UNR, I guess, but they didn't. They chose to go out of state, which is a perfectly fine option. But, you know, they incurred a lot of student loans by doing that. And then they went on to higher education and did that. And my point back to him was, well, if I were living by the same standards that you were, I would be upset with you for wasting my tax dollars when I don't have student loan debt. But you chose to go out of state. You chose to do this. So I could say to him, well, that's your responsibility. I don't have to help you. You don't deserve any kind of help, which is the same thing he's saying because he took out private loans instead of some of these other loans that y'all took out. And so unfortunately, he doesn't qualify for any kind of help. And he said, oh, well, I paid my student loans back. Why do these people get handouts, but I don't? And I just feel like that's such a backwards way of thinking about this issue. And it's a backwards way of thinking about how we help our fellow neighbors and how we help our fellow Americans get out of debt faster and do away with this predatory way that we educate people in this country. So just wanted your thoughts on that.
Outsourcing your Facebook arguments. I like the way you work.
Listen, I was extra salty about this one because, again, I know how he grew up and I know the leg up he had in life. And so it really pissed me off. So continue.
I feel that. No, I understand. And I've encountered these people too. And the thing is, they are also, you know, fundamentally not that different from us. And this idea that we're looking at other people being mad that somebody else is getting help is just kind of a symptom of when we all have a boot on our neck and we're all scrabbling desperately for some kind of help. So I think there's a couple of points I feel on this front when it comes to like the people who are making choices and are like my tax dollars. The my tax dollar thing I think is one of the most like inane baby approaches to money and life, because it shows like a misunderstanding of what tax dollars do, or a willful misunderstanding. It's like intellectually dishonest, because like my tax dollars, I don't want to be paying for, you know, militarized police or Raytheon contracts. But alas, I don't get to do that. I would love to say my tax dollars can pay for like people like my mom and my sister to have healthcare and parks and roads and abolishing golf, you know, things that I want my tax dollars to pay for, you know, fun little things like that, you know, saving the bees, all the things that I care about. But unfortunately, no, I have to fund the police and I have to fund all these other things. But that's what it means to live in a society. And again, and like it sucks. Like, is our civics education that rough out here? No, but I don't want to be glib. It's the pressure and the pain of having to have taken out private loans and not having the freedom to be able to make the decisions that feel right for you because of these financial constraints. So I feel for that and I have a deep empathy for it. But you cannot turn and look at the person down the line who is also suffering and think that trying to undercut them and ensure their suffering is not going to alleviate yours. And that's an unfortunate thing. It's a spiritual thing you have to come to terms with. But ultimately, when one of us is helped out from under the weight, they will then work to get the rest of us out from under the weight. That is the goal. That's what we're really all working towards here. And that's my hope, is like that we can all kind of connect over that we don't need to squabble over these couple $1 billion that the wealthy can fund themselves. We need to work with each other. If we can't help us, no one can.
Yeah, I think it's the distraction part is what always kills me is, oh, look over here, while, you know, corporations and billionaires keep just making millions and billions of dollars every single day. It's insane to me. Bev, I want to come back to you for a minute. So I want to talk about maybe things that can be done at the state level and why we also need to be working on this at the state level. A few years back, BBP actually had a bill. We worked with Senator, now Attorney General Aaron Ford, to have a bill to create an ombudsman, to have a bill to potentially be able to refinance student loan debt. And unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. But this was a conversation we were having back in 2013, 2015, because this is something that we've really needed to work on for a long time. I know that Governor Sisolak has announced a committee to investigate making tuition at the state community colleges and trade schools free, which I think would be incredible because not everybody wants to go to a traditional college and we need other paths to education in this state. So could that help young people entering the workforce or even people of all ages and wanting to start a new career or start a new educational path? What do you think about that? And how should the state move forward? And how should Governor Sisolak be addressing this?
Yeah, I honestly think it's really great that, he's planning to look into this, especially, I know one of Biden's big talking points, during the campaign was free community college. So I think it's really cool that our governor is actually taking that to heart and looking into how to actually implement that. I think that it would absolutely be helpful for young people. Not everybody needs to go to college. Not everybody wants to go to college. And I think, like Catherine said, like we grew up in this generation where we're basically told a 4-year degree is what you need to do. And because of that, we are now lacking, workers who get skills from trade schools or community colleges. And that's affecting our economy and our communities in a different way. I have a friend of mine who went to trade school to be a mechanic, and, just paid off his student loans from doing that. Can't buy a house, all these things. And so I think it's just another step to help us in Nevada to be able to have like financial freedom. And especially in our state, I don't think you necessarily need a 4-year degree to be successful in the state. I remember when I was in high school, there were people who worked on the strip that were, making tons of money. So I think like reinvesting in trade schools and community colleges, especially in Nevada, is something that could be really useful. And, show that there are many different paths to being successful.
Absolutely. Max, I want to come back to you. So you recently graduated from UNLV. What do job prospects look like now in the post-COVID world, especially here in Nevada for folks who are just getting out of college? And how does that affect the urgency to take action on student loan debt now?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest here. When I first was looking for jobs, it was not it was not as great as you would think if you graduated, with a bachelor. You would think that gets you in the door, like into any entry-level positions, but that's not true. And because I was a first-generation student, I struggled a lot through school, let alone knowing what to do afterwards. So yeah, that was like ridiculous looking at jobs. One job I remember specifically was a social justice like research center. I have a degree in anthropology and gender and sexuality. All I did was doing that, like the entire 4 years. That's all I was doing. So that should have put me into that position because like I've been doing that. That's in itself, my degree has experience. So, but they were like, no, you need on top of that 2 years extra like research experience, yada, yada. You don't think about those things when you're going through college. So like those jobs are like not as great, I was like, oh yeah, I have a bachelor. I'm just going to get right in and get any job I want. But no, what really got me the current position I have is knowing folks and being a community organizer since literally I started college. Like that's the thing I was doing. So yeah, and the urgency, I think, is just the fact that even though it's going to be paid off, but I would be responsible for my debt in 6 months. So I think the urgency in that is that most folks are worried that 6 months mark is hitting and they're just not gonna, get what they need. I think, especially with Biden's plan and the reducing and removing the interest, is helpful. But I think a lot of people are still that 6 month marks is terrifying. So the fact that we have this plan in place, I'm not scared anymore. I don't have that 6 month mark going to hit me in the face. And I think that was really the urgency in that, why more action needs to be taken so that, like, we have less debt. So the more the merrier, that's just me. But yeah.
So you're working for Our Future right now, which is one of our amazing partners in the community. What do you think young voters, especially, but all voters on this issue, need to see from our candidates running for office in 2022 to know that their issues, like student loan debt, are being taken seriously? What do you want to hear as a voter here in Nevada?
Yeah, I think one of the things, as someone who's been lobbying for this, been talking to folks up in Carson City about student debt forever, I would love for them to maybe focus on more grants or more accessibility to grants, because I think the Silver State grant is amazing. But the fact that you have to be doing 15 credits per semester to get that is ridiculous. I think we should have it way lower. And I've been to Carson City. I was like, y'all need to do this, make it accessible to everybody, not just people who are full-time students. Because as we know, most people who need those grants are low income, and most of the time they're not full-time students. They're working full-time jobs and going to school. So I think that really needs to be addressed by candidates working on the grants here, making it just more affordable. You really want to see that. Just talking to college students, all they care about is just making it affordable. Of course, a lot of them want free college, but at the very minimum, I think candidates should be focusing on making it more affordable and spending more money into our higher education system. So that way we don't have to go and pull out loans. So, yeah.
Thank you, Max. Catherine, I want to bring you back in. Same question for you as a journalist who covers this and covers other issues that we're working on, and just somebody who has experienced this personally, but also has friends and family who have probably experienced this as well. What do you want to hear from candidates on this issue? And what do you think voters want to hear when it comes to these type of issues that really do impact so many different types of people all across the spectrum in this country?
Well, fundamentally, I think bringing back the idea of free community college on the state level, trying across the board to make that happen, that will solve a lot of what I'm talking about when I talk about that stress of what do I do? How do I chase the bettering of my life and my prospects that young people are facing without the giant bill that comes with signing on to the four-year university at that age. I also think we should invest into more public programs that allow those young people to take time and explore their other options and not feel like they're pipelined into making a profit for some university. That's also hugely important. And another part of this equation that we haven't really been able to speak on yet is wage stagnation, and the idea that the four-year degree is now the high school degree of years past, that so many employers can be like, not only do you need the bachelor's, but you also need experience after your bachelor's. You need unpaid internships worth of experience, that kind of stuff. We have to wrestle with the fact that if we're going to make this the new point of entry, we need to pay for it. We need to create and make sure it's not funneling out our most vulnerable. And even just we should have a society where in communities where people who are working as baristas, who are working as retail workers should be able to afford the rents in their area. They should be able to afford the necessities. Where college shouldn't be, okay, I'm going to take this gamble with all this money I don't have, hoping that somebody will see me and then hopefully pay me something that will make it worth it. That is a huge part of the problem too. We can't live in a society that undervalues everyone who doesn't pursue higher education. That's insulting to all of the work that it takes to build a real meaningful community. And that's the most important. And so I want to see that. I think for parents right now, because my publication is a parenting magazine, they are millennials and they are Gen X. So they are saddled with the student debt and they're now going, oh, shoot, 18, 17 for my kid is coming and I'm still looking behind me here. Or people who want to become parents, but can't possibly see a world where they can do that if they have to keep their head down and work, particularly for people who give birth. You tend to also face another barrier if you leave to go do that, to have children. If you are, having children is a health issue. It's something that you can't necessarily be on your feet working at Target or be on your feet if you're post C-section. All of these realities of having a body and rearing children, we undervalue anyway. So, somebody who's saddled with $30K of student loan debt is probably shoot, the baby I really want is just not in the cards for me. So maybe I have to invest in IVF. All of these things. It's just a self-fulfilling failure prophecy of keeping people in the spiral of the boot on their neck. And so we have to recognize that. And instead of, there's a lot of talking points about millennials, especially, we're still children, we're still, BuzzFeed, Scooter, 20-year-olds disrupting the economy. And it's I'm tired. I'm 29. I desperately would like to buy a house that a landlord can't sell out from under me. I would desperately, I don't really want kids, but I would love to make sure that my sister can have kids and I'd be a fucking cool aunt. Let me do that and be a part of my community in a meaningful way without debt hanging over my head. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to. This is not people trying to get one over on the government, get rich, go on mega yachts or some nonsense like that. This is people wanting to participate in adult life and not have the weight hanging over them. That's all it is.
As a geriatric millennial, as they call us lovingly, I wish I was still able to ride a scooter, but I went out till 1:30 a.m. last week and I almost died. So, we're all old and aging young people at this point, who have real lives, who have kids. Like you said, we know millennials who are older, who have older kids now, who are starting to think about, do they go into trades? Do they do apprenticeships? Do they do college, right? Those are all totally valid things to think about. And we need to start creating those pathways so that what happened to our generation and other generations doesn't keep happening to the young people who are coming behind us, because we are not young anymore. I hate to break it to everybody who's a millennial. We're not young. We're just getting older. And we've got to break these generational cycles that have happened before us, because we can't keep living like this. And I think that's what this really does start to do, is breaking those generational cycles of the way things used to be. I love hearing the older folks saying, well, I paid my student loan debts off. And I'm like, well, right. But how old are you? You're 75 years old. College was $200 when you went. It wasn't thousands upon thousands of dollars to go to these classes, because all that's happened over time is that these universities keep raising tuitions, raising prices, and it makes it impossible for people to go to college then. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Catherine, and I think this is another thing that we don't think enough about, is, I have a lot of folks on my staff who maybe I only have an undergrad degree because I refused to go on past that because I didn't want debt. But I have a lot of young people or people on my staff who don't have degrees at all. And what about employers starting to think about that differently, so that it's not mandatory to get into the workforce or to get experience or even to learn things on the job that maybe a 4-year degree can't even teach you anyways? My political science degree did not teach me how to do this job. That was from work and experience and time put in. So what about people who maybe don't have the opportunity to go to higher ed? Why are they being left out of this conversation as well? And how do we change that as employers?
You hit on, this is one of my very passionate special interests, because I know so many people who, as a journalist, in journalism as a whole, while a lot of people do have BAs or masters, and because it rewards that kind of rich bubble, which is its own thing, to be a good reporter, all you have to do is have a developed empathy muscle, be a little annoying and persistent, and know your punctuation. And even there, I know some reporters who play fast and loose with their M dashes. It's cool. We like that. But for me, I need proof that you can tell a story and that you've got a human soul to you. So you're going to do it well. And that, speaks to my industry. But I think every industry, you can say that there are people who are very capable of being these meaningful key members in their life experiences. Somebody with a life experience that doesn't include living in a dorm for 4 years, it includes so much more. That's 4 whole years of life living outside of this like microcosm community that most colleges are. And I'm not even hating on colleges, because I think it's one of the few places where our millennials, at least, weren't treated like stupid babies. So like, there's pros and cons to this. But what we have to look at is that there is value to be had from having these more diverse staffs, and class diversity is an important part of that equation. When I'm among coworkers, I'm often sometimes the only person who is like, well, what about uninsured and underinsured people? What about like people who are forever renters? What about people who have to navigate SNAP benefits? Like all of these kind of things that are layers of life that I don't always trust somebody who went to an Ivy League school to understand. And we have to start to value that experience in a meaningful way. And I think there's a vested interest, because we all bought in to the student loans and to to the higher degrees, and that they are worthwhile. We bought into them as job training. And we have to dismantle the idea that your education is job training. Your education is something, it's spiritual, it's philosophical, and it is beneficial to your work. But it should not be the prerequisite for the work, because people can learn on the job. Some of the smartest, scrappiest people were out here surviving on retail jobs in these things. And they're the people you want on your team. And we need to remove that classist veneer that somebody has to have sat through a survey course on Beowulf. They don't need to. It's cool if they did. I love that. Hell yeah. But it's not a requirement. We need to release that, and then allow education on that level to take its rightful place as an important part of our culture, important part of our society, but not this last ditch effort to maybe be able to keep a roof over your head, because that mindset is going to hurt us all.
Plato did not teach me shit about fighting Donald Trump. So I'll just say that, because, he actually could read Donald Trump. Maybe or maybe not. All right, Bev, sorry, it's just hot take night, because I get all fired up and then, I start just popping off. Bev, I want to come back to you. For the audience at home, I know a lot of folks have comments and questions in the chat. Thank you. Keep that going. Share this on Twitch, share it on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Make sure that your friends and family know this conversation's having. So go hit the share button on your social media, because we want to share this far and wide with all the folks you know. If y'all have questions, now's the time to put them in the chat for our 3 fabulous panelists tonight. So get all those comments and questions in the chat now if you all want to be a part of the conversation. Bev, while we're waiting for the audience to participate, coming back to you for a second. In addition to your knowledge of working with young voters, you also will be impacted by Biden's plan for your graduate student loans. How do you see this? I know you talked about this a little bit, but just to put a finer point on it, how do you see this affecting your financial situation and others who took out loans both for undergrad and grad school? And where do we see this going from here? What do you hope happens from here?
Yeah. So first off, I would just like to say I use my analysis of Beowulf every single day, obviously. No, but I think, what you both were alluding to earlier, I'm 31 now. I want to be an adult. I live with my mom right now. And, part of that is absolutely due to other issues. I have health issues. I used up most of my savings in the last several years to pay off medical debt, which is, a whole nother issue that we have in this country. But because of that, I can't afford to move out. The idea of even putting together a down payment for a house is something that I actually laugh about, because I just don't see it ever happening. Maybe one day. And so I think for a lot of people in that situation, this is the beginning, hopefully, of that change, of saddling young people with, all this debt that, makes it so that they can't move forward. Again, for the first time in my life, I have started to think about retirement and the fact that I might be around by the time I retire. A thing that, I like to joke with some people on our team, not 100% sure society will still exist by then, but if it does, I would maybe like to have some money to survive. And so, as we're getting older, like these are decisions we have to make. And I think that's just really important. I also think this idea of having higher education, again, which is something, both you and Catherine were talking about earlier. I think it's really interesting because, we talk about how the bachelor's degree is like the new high school diploma, but our education is not helping us in our day-to-day work most of the time. And, that's what you said. And, even like going to grad school, I made the choice to do that, hoping to kind of break into like a different side of politics. And, unfortunately that didn't happen. And that's okay. I love where I am. And so it worked out the way it was supposed to. And I don't regret my decision to go to grad school because I did learn a lot. But for the most part, there were some tangible skills, but for the most part, that's not helping me in my day-to-day work, especially in our field. Like, I know so many people who didn't go to college at all, who just went straight into organizing, and they are just as successful, if not more so, without that degree. So I think this is a good start. I think the larger conversation needs to be focused on, making college more affordable before you have to take out the loans. We're seeing an increase in housing prices. Like it's all these things that are compounding on each other that are making it so difficult for millennials and generations, after us that, who are struggling to figure out how we survive in this world.
So I want to move into audience comments and questions. There's a lot of people in the chat with their own student loan debt stories who are sharing that in the chat. Keep doing that. We want to hear from you. We also have our story bank organizer, Brenda, who wants to hear your stories. So we will put her contact information in the chat right now. If y'all have a student loan debt story, we want you to share those with us because we want to go out there and tell your stories about how this is impacting you and the real life impacts this has on people all across this country every single day, because as you hear from these three, it's impacting them, and this is good. Mary Dungan in the chat, she's one of our storytellers. She does amazing work. She was saying she has something like $88,000 in student loan debt, and she is 66 years old. This is not just a young person problem. This affects all Americans of all generations. And this is really something that has been going on and just getting worse and worse and worse, especially for people maybe who wanted to go back to school later in life. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity when they were young and they went back, as older folks who wanted to get a further education, which is perfectly acceptable and wonderful. How is this impacting those generations as well? And why should a 66-year-old woman be saddled with that much debt still at this point? So like what should we be thinking about when it comes to this? Because it's not just young people. It's not just affecting young people. It's affecting all of us. So just want to get your thoughts on that. And Max, I'll start with you.
Yeah. I think overall, like, college should be something that shouldn't be a requirement, because we all, at least millennials and Gen Z, we were raised that this is the only pathway in life. And as like the rest of y'all were saying, like, it was beneficial to learn and grow and all this. But I'm hoping that this is just a start. And I think a lot of folks are hoping this is just a start and not because I think a lot of folks, in some, I will validate that they feel like this is more a little bit feeling like a Band-Aid than like feeling like it's addressing the issue entirely. And this is why this needs to be more than just, this is it, we're not going to do more. And I also like the fact that we are focusing and thinking in the mindset that trade school is not something that is like something you can do on the, like, oh, I'm not going to go to college, like that kind of thing. We should prioritize those multiple different pathways in life so that way we don't get to this point again, because not having trade schools and not having other pathways to get to a career is not beneficial for the entire country. We need to make it to where we all have access to careers, because as I was saying earlier, like having a bachelor doesn't mean it gets you even into entry level jobs. And it just reminds me too that like my mom had a coworker, and my mom works at Harry Reid Airport as like one of the check-in desk folks, and she had a coworker who had a degree in psychology, and they're not even making like $15 an hour at least then. They're better now, but like back then they were making like $10 an hour, and she had a psychology degree that she still had to pay off. That, you know, that kind of stuff shouldn't be happening. You should be getting, you know, you would think that, or you would, what we were told, basically, that getting a degree, you're going to have a good life. You're going to have everything paid for you. And I think with this plan, you know, maybe we can get to a world where that's true. At least that's what I'm hoping, that we can get to a world where we have careers after doing some kind of form of education afterwards. I was just very fortunate, but yeah.
Same question for you, Catherine.
I mean, first of all, to Mary, having lived a full life and having a son even who's at his point with his student loans, like there's a part among my friends, we always joke, well, I've forgiven myself, which I've been saying for years, that like, you know, your investment in yourself and your future is so valuable, and your experiences through your education are something so valuable. But this is due to the decision that education should be allocated to those that can afford it, or those that are willing to shoot themselves in the foot in order to, you know, via debt. This kind of harm was done to all of us in this way, and there should be a relief, especially once you hit 66 and you've contributed to your community in such a meaningful way. And that's something that I think more people should be repulsed by, the idea that somebody who has existed for this long and worked and raised a family and been a part of the community isn't able to obtain relief in a meaningful way. That should be, along with like wage stagnation, all the things that contribute to this kind of debt accumulating. More people should be radicalized by that. Hearing your story, hearing stories of similar people with similar levels of debt that's keeping them from having the kind of lives they want. Like more and more, I'm like to everyone, let this be something that radicalizes you if you're not already there. I don't know how a lot of people aren't there, but everyone has their threshold. Get to your threshold, because you don't want to be, a community worth living in and a society worth living in is not surrounded by people who are held prisoner. None of us want that. And if you do, you're a supervillain. Like,
I mean, I get radicalized by like small things. So like if this doesn't radicalize you, or anything else that's heinous that you see every day, like I don't know what will, but that's just me. I literally watch TV and get radicalized. That's just who I am. I was called a radical leftist this week, Catherine, and it was literally the biggest joy of my life. I was like, finally, I've made it. Adam Laxalt called me a radical leftist. I'm living my true potential now. God bless. So shout out to the birthday boy for calling me a radical leftist this week. Woo! Bev, I want to ask you this next question. Ignacio in the chat was asking this. Why do you think not everybody is celebrating, and what would you tell them? And I think this is a really important question as we kind of round out the evening and finish out our chat with the guests watching at home. What do you tell them about the people maybe who are pissed off that somebody's getting help, or who maybe doesn't think this has gone far enough?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can understand and appreciate that perspective. I remember at some point they were talking about a reduction by $50,000. That's like a huge chunk of change. I mean, 10,000 and 20,000 is also, but I think the average borrower has 38,000 in student loans, and so yes, this is wiping out a lot for a huge chunk of people, but there's still a lot more. to be done. And so I can understand why people, may not be fully satisfied. And I also think that what this is missing and what we still need to do is really address tuition and, college affordability. We have seen, the cost of tuition just increase exponentially over, the last, probably 20, 30 years. And that's crazy. We are like setting up a society where we're saying education is important, but then we're only going to allow the wealthiest and the most elite to obtain it. And I don't think that's an accident. I think especially like where we are politically, like certain people out there want people who aren't educated for a reason. And so I think we really need to address that issue so that no matter what, no matter your background, if you want to go to college, you should be able to go to college. I personally think like we should have free college. I don't understand why that's not a thing. And so I get that, this wasn't like a huge win for everybody. But again, I think it's a good start. And I hope that, Biden has said that he's planning to, address holding schools accountable, colleges and universities accountable. I think that's really great. I think that's, again, a good start. One thing we didn't really talk about a lot, but, is also part of his plan is the changes to the public service loan forgiveness program. I went to a public service school, and this is actually the first employer in my 6 years since grad school where I will qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Super exciting. But, we have these programs out there to help people who are, committing so much to our communities. And, they deserve to be, treated that way. So yeah, I think that this is a good start. But I hope that there is more coming down the line.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. The last one I want to talk about, and I think I'll just start with Catherine and I'll open it up to all of you. And I think it's a really good point. Dave was talking in the chat about, how did we get to this point? Because in the 70s, when he was in college, he worked 24 hours a week, but also he was able to pay off it for an off-campus apartment, utilities, food, a car, school tuition, and entertainment. So, I also think this is one of those issues where there's a lot of intersection, right? We talked about medical bills. We've talked about wages. We've talked about opportunities and privilege and all of these things that kind of roll into the issue around student loan debt. So, Catherine, talk about wages and why, even my husband, who would have to he would go a semester, even with the Millennium Scholarship, and then have to take the next semester off to be able to pay for school because he would work full time because he wasn't making enough to pay the tuition and also be able to eat and live. Talk to us about how wages and home prices and all of these other issues tie into the student loan debt issue.
Sure. So we all when we're talking about how money works, we have some generational divides. We call it the Arrested Development. It's a banana. What can it cost? $10 effect. Donald Trump's grocery store thing where the knowledge of how much things cost now versus then has led to attitudes about those entitled kids who want things paid for. But that's all because we have not been actually actively paying attention to that profits soar, productivity soars, and wages have stayed down. And when we understand that profit, if you're going to take a certain school of thought, is a stolen wage, one may say, to get spicy. So who is making money still? The people in these upper positions who are not necessarily producing anything or doing legwork or, meaningfully contributing. And when workers are paid in accordance to the work they put in, we'll see those numbers change, and we'll see the minimum wage shouldn't be $7.25 for any kind of work. And the kind of people who are making multiple six figures, 400,000 a year, that kind of nonsense with bonuses and all the crazy Monopoly guy money, Scrooge McDuck money people, they couldn't do a single day of work at a Target. They couldn't do a single day of work at an Amazon warehouse. They would, die of lower back pain. Like, so we have to like really critically look at who is getting underserved and where is the high profits, where are they going? Who are they going to? At this point, there's more money being made by so many industries that is just not reaching people. And if you aren't mad about that, and if you aren't able to push for that, like then you're missing on like, do you believe some people just shouldn't be entitled to survive? And you have to think critically here. Like, you can no longer pretend that you don't know how much it costs to rent in any area. I live in New York. The average rents, not in the city even. So my rents are cheaper than New York, but they're still wild, and they take up more than half of all of my paychecks. And that's all of my friends have in common. How are we supposed to build savings, pay off our student loans, pay for food, not to mention like healthful food if we're thinking, in terms of nutrition and trying to keep yourself alive, healthcare, all of these other bills that come up and participate in the economy. How are we supposed to do that if we're like shuffling around the meager amount we're getting?
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important fact is like when you're younger, especially, but any stage of life, especially if you have to work and go to school, that's a huge burden. And like Max was saying, with the Millennium Scholarship or other grants or things like that, you got to take a minimum number of classes to get that. Well, I was lucky when we started the Millennium Scholarship, it was a lower threshold for that. But how does a person go to school and work, or especially if they don't have any savings or they don't have any generational wealth? It's just not possible. And so I think we have to get really realistic in this country that wages are stagnant. Luckily in Nevada, we have raised our minimum wage at least to $12 over time, still not enough. And we got to talk about the cost of healthcare. We got to talk about the cost of groceries. And that's just we're not even talking about inflation. We're just talking about the bare minimum of what it costs to live as a human being right now, especially if you don't have wealth built up and you got to pay student loans and all these other things. It's just not possible. Max, Bev, anything y'all want to add to that, or any final thoughts on this? Because I know it's been a long evening, but it's been a really fruitful conversation.
I'll just reiterate, I think what, I said before, and kind of what we've all said. I think that this is a really good start. But especially, in terms of the intersectionality of this issue, there's the cost of everyday life, but we're also still facing, gender inequality in the workplace, that ties to wages. We're facing racial inequality in the workplace. And so I think that this is just kind of another product of a society that has been set up to benefit white straight men. And so I hope that, that we continue to pass good policies and have elected officials who want to try and change that system.
Absolutely. Max, any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I guess just as someone, a community organizer, and people might be like, what can I do? Or what are things that we should be doing to continue this work and continue more of these type of things? Because I've been a community organizer since 2018 on and off, either professionally or volunteer basis. A lot of my lobbying is on volunteer basis. So I think what I would like, or what I would hope to see in my community, is just more folks wanting to see this change and feeling more energized. And I think we're going to see that. I think people are going to feel more energized, or as y'all were saying, radicalized. I hope so. I hope so. So I hope that I'll see more folks in the next, here in Nevada. We're going to have our next legislative session. So I hope to see folks go out there, go volunteer basis to fight more for this type of stuff in our own state. I would love to see folks more in Carson City talking to our legislators. And it's not that scary. I know it sounds scary, but it's not. Talking to your legislators, they're human beings like us. So, hope to see more of y'all out there next year.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself, Max. And if you do want to get involved with us, like I said, just to plug the Story Bank again, we actually take folks up to Carson City with us for grassroots lobby days and things like that. Would love to have you join the Story Bank. Would love to have you join our volunteer team. So get involved with Brenda. Her contact information's in the chat. And we'd love to have you all participate more with us if you're watching at home. Just one more thing before we wrap on this really important conversation tonight. We are going to be going dark next week for Out in Front because we have Celebrate Progress next Wednesday, September 7th at 6 p.m. at the Paiute Golf Course here in Las Vegas. But we also have a virtual option for our statewide folks, or if you still need to be COVID safe and stay at home, we have a virtual option for you. So Shelby is going to put all the contact information for Celebrate Progress in the chat on all the different streams right now. Would love to have you attend. We still have a few seats available in person. We have as many seats as you want virtually. So make sure you sign up, register for Celebrate Progress today. That's going to be next Wednesday, September 7th at 6 p.m. We're honoring all kinds of amazing Nevadans, and we definitely want you to be involved. So join us for Celebrate Progress next week. And next week, we will not be out in front with you on Thursday, but we will be back the following week with another amazing episode Thursday at 5 for Out in Front. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all to our amazing guests for staying a little over with us and having this important conversation on student loan debt. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great evening, everyone. Hope to see you next week at Celebrate Progress. Thanks again for always supporting our work.